Hello and welcome to the Mindset Mentor. I'm Tania Kolar, helping you cultivate a life you love. As you know, your mindset is like a muscle that needs to be strengthened and conditioned, and this is your mindset workout. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that I think does not get enough attention, and that is grief and loss. And I think the reason it doesn't get enough attention is because so many people don't know what to say to somebody when they are going through a period of grief or when they're in that process. The last thing they feel like doing most of the time is talking to someone. And I think having a conversation is so key, and it's so important in the understanding the journey of grieving and being able to help family and loved ones, or of course yourself if you're going through that, to really understand how to navigate. There is certainly a process, and we're going to talk about that process. Coming up, you're going to hear from a woman who lost her 7-year-old son to cancer. Unimaginable grief and suffering and pain. And, here's the thing is that she's here today to talk about her story so that she can help others. And if you're listening and you're going through this, I truly want you to stay for the entire show to learn, how you can navigate through this time. And remember that you're never alone. And these conversations are so important. And so I want to say hello and welcome to Trish Carpenter. It is such a
Hello.
pleasure having you here.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you.
Well, I want to start off, Trish, by first of all acknowledging you for being here and having the courage and, being vulnerable enough to share your story. Such a recent loss that you have gone through, and I'll let you share the story and the timeline. But I do want to acknowledge you for being here to help other people. I mean, it's a really big deal, and so much courage, and so thank you for that.
Oh, not at all. Thank you very much, Tanya, for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So through your journey, obviously quite a painful journey, you also wrote a book about it. Your book is called Big Hands, Little Hand, Big Hand, Little Hand, and Mom's story of love and loss. And I got to say that I was so surprised to hear the first time that we spoke that your son passed in 2019. I was truly shocked by that because, I heard about you through a mutual friend of ours, and I thought it was, many years ago. Because I'm truly amazed that you are able to have this conversation here today, with all of us, and also the fact that you have written a book, so beautifully written and articulated about your journey, but really in the hopes of helping other people. So again, this is truly a phenomenal that you are able to help enlighten people who are going through something similar. So obviously, losing a child, a parent's worst nightmare. And I want to talk about that for you. What was it like when you heard the diagnosis that your son had cancer?
Well, and that's the tricky thing. We had two diagnoses. The first one was in 2017 in December, just before we were going on Christmas holidays. And that was when we found out that Tom had a brain tumor. And the weeks that followed, we found out it was a medulloblastoma, which is a fairly, in terms of brain tumors, it's the sort of one that is a pediatric brain tumor. And then we had another, say, 11 months of treatment and rehabilitation and all this time in hospital. And then the second diagnosis was when he relapsed in the November of the following year, in 2018, and that relapse was the prognosis was terminal from that point. So we only had a couple of months really left with Tom at that point. So the first time they told me that Tom had brain cancer, I was very hopeful. I assumed that he would be fine. People do survive cancer. They told us we had a good chance. The tumor hadn't metastasized, it hadn't spread. It was in a place that they could surgically remove it. So, we had hope all the way through. And so when Tom's exhaustion started to build again and his headache started in the October, November, and we found out that the tumor had aggressively returned once we'd stopped the chemotherapy, that was such a great shock because it took away all the hope that, you know, and the expectation that we would get past all of this. And so I guess I remember like not breathing, like everything froze in me. I couldn't fathom what the doctor had said. And the doctor had said to us, he said, you know, it's come back, it's spread throughout his brain and spine. Tom is not going to survive this return. And like, it just did not compute. And then I stopped breathing. And then, you know, I sort of don't remember the next, you know, couple of minutes, but then I remember screaming and crying and it all going really bad. But at the same time, I had to, you know, walk out of that small room and go and see Tom. Like, so you know, we had to find ways every time we got bad news to get ourselves together again and go back into the fray and support our little boy. So that's what we did.
Wow. You know, I can't even imagine that. You know, hearing that, trying to process it, all, you know, being bombarded with, I'm sure, you know, a ton of emotion. So what was it like with talking to Tom? I mean, did you tell him, you know, what was going to happen and, you know, what the prognosis was? How did you handle that with him?
Well, initially when we learned that he had a brain tumor, it was much easier to talk to him about, you know, you've been so tired. There's something that we can do about that, and we'll do some surgery and then you'll feel better. And then after that, when they did the resection for Tom's tumor, because of the placement, and it was right behind the cerebellum, between the brainstem and the cerebellum, he suffered a brain injury from that called posterior fossa syndrome, which meant that it took away all of his ability to balance, to use any motor control that's voluntary. So he couldn't speak, he couldn't swallow. For a time, he couldn't see. He certainly couldn't sit or use his hands or walk. And so we had, you know, and so that communication straight away was really difficult because he couldn't speak and we couldn't communicate easily. But over time, and we were, you know, really honest with Tom, and I sort of said, we have to take these medications. If we take this medicine, then we'll get better. When we do these exercises, we'll get our hands back and we'll get closer to where we were. And so, and the hospital was wonderful. The occupational therapists, they helped us with some language for the boys, because Thomas has a twin brother, Cameron. And so these 7-year-old boys, you know, it's a big topic, cancer. It's not something they'd ever heard of before. And so they gave us great language and great sort of narratives to sort of weave through this idea of the egg in his head, you know, this brain tumor in his head, and what the chemotherapy would do and what everything would look like. And then when it came to Tom's terminal prognosis and the decision to talk to Tom about that, my ex-husband and I, we did disagree, and I was conflicted. I didn't know quite how to manage it, but I did a fair bit of research online. I was looking for advice from anywhere, and the wonderful people at our hospital in Brisbane, you know, they were also very, very honest with me, and they suggested that we were honest, that I did speak to Tom about what was going to happen. And the interesting thing is, and the palliative care nurses had said to me, you'd be surprised how many kids already know that they are palliative, that they are terminal. They know that something is different. But particularly kids who are primary school age, like really, you know, 7 years old, for example, it's not a conversation that they can feel that they can bring up with their parents, with anyone. And Cameron had no clue. Cameron, Tom's brother, had no idea what was happening. And so, but then there was all these setbacks as well. Tom had a really terrible infection that came up when he was immunocompromised, which nearly took him from us one day. And so then there were these setbacks of like, when can we say we don't want to do it when he's really sick or unwell? Or trying to find that timing was difficult. And so, and then also Christmas was looming, and my husband and I, we were wanting to get married before Tom passed. So there was a very rushed wedding. And then Tom's father also wanted to marry his partner before. So there was another rushed wedding. So there was so many things happening, and it was a chaotic time, because we're also trying to bucket list and memory make and you know, all of these things going on all at once. And so eventually I just sort of said, no, we have to stop. We have to sit him down because he's too clever. And he knows something's going on. And so we split the conversation into two halves. So first of all, we told him that the cancer had returned, and that all the work that we had done already, we're going to need to do a little bit more, because he was starting to take medication again. He was starting to have to go back to the hospital again. All of that sort of stuff had returned, and that needed explanation. And then we let that settle for a little bit, and then we had the conversation about the fact that the tumor was too big, that the doctors couldn't fix it this time. And then that conversation, I spoke to Tom about, his grandfather had passed away a year or so before. His childhood dog, Casbah, had passed away. We talked about Casbah in heaven before, and the boys were baptized Catholic, but that wasn't a massive part of their understanding of life and religion and heaven. But I wanted to focus on the loveliness of heaven and going to see people that were going to look after him. I said to him that there was this amazing job that they gave to really special souls, to children, when they got to heaven, and that's to shine a star for us. So we'll be looking at his star every night, and that was the sort of stuff. And I said to him, like, we can do whatever you want. Like, let's go and do some wonderful things. And so we were able to have some conversations about, what he wanted at his service, at his funeral. And I watched the boys' relationship change a little bit, because, brothers are, they niggle and they wrestle and they get annoyed with each other. And, Cameron had been patiently waiting for things to go back to normal. And even though, like, he hadn't had the massive impact of what Thomas had, he was still really, like, desperate for our lives to go back, to the way that was. And so, when we told Thomas, he sort of said, well, like, I already know. Like, can we talk about something else now? Like, he was not fazed. Whereas Cameron was like, oh my gosh, we have to go to the hospital. We have to see the doctors. And he just wanted there to be a fix so badly. But after that conversation, I watched the boys. They had so much more time for each other. They were patient with each other. Cameron made all these efforts to just be the kindest soul to Tom. And he wasn't impatient anymore. And he wasn't feeling like, no one ever looks and worries about me, because it's always worrying about Tom. And he was, so I will always be thankful that he had that opportunity to spend those last, week and a half, 2 weeks with Tom, with that mindset, with that changed attitude. And Thomas was the same. I've got these beautiful photos of them wrestling on the couch, because they always loved to wrestle, and laughing and giggling and all of that. So that was really glorious to see. It was really lovely to see. And so when Tom was passing away, Cameron sort of knew that he had, he'd been a great brother. And he is a great brother. So that was really, I think, a good choice that I made, even though it was one of the most difficult things to do and to decide, and then to actually have those conversations. It was heartbreaking, but
yeah,
it was important.
And it's so important to have these conversations. So again, to let people know that, for you, that was absolutely the right decision. Because I think it's a big question for a lot of people. It's like, what do they do? Do they say? Do they tell their loved one, or do they not? And I think that it's a moment that you can ponder forever and really not know the right answer, until you take the action and see what happens, right? And I think it's so important, and must be such a weight lifted off your shoulders to have had the conversation as well. Obviously, you would be dealing with so many layers and levels of emotion, not only yours, but your whole family. Obviously, Tom's, Cameron's, and, everybody else who's connected. So that's a huge responsibility. It's a big weight. And I think that, however you can help to alleviate some of that is it's worth, having that. So I do want to talk a little bit, as we get into the show on things that you did to take care of yourself during this process. Because when you're the caregiver, when you're taking care of a loved one, you tend to forget yourself. And I think that, that's something that's very common and people just lose themselves in that. So I do want to talk about, some of the ways that you helped, yourself and your family to cope through that. But I also want to talk a little bit about your book. So, what inspired you to write a book? I know that you did a lot of research and looking for answers. And I think that's something that everybody wants. We want to know, why is this happening? What can I do and how can I help and what can, how to process everything. So, looking for the answers and maybe not finding some of those answers. I know you started to really put together, this beautiful book that you have. So let's talk about that journey and what inspired you to do that.
Well, just going past like when we first learned what was happening, and it was completely out of my realm of experience. I'm a teacher, and so when I don't know something, I will read about it and try and teach myself, learn what is the best thing to do. Even when I found out I was pregnant with twins, I was like, oh God, I have to find out. This is going to be really hard.
A lot of work.
Yeah, and I didn't know anyone else who had multiple birth, and so I went looking. Then I also a sister. I'm surrounded by women in my life, so having boys was also something that I was concerned about. So I must prepare. I must be ready. And then when this came along, I thought, well, I need to learn. I need to be ready for all that's coming. And the oncologists at the hospital were fantastic. They offered me all these research documents and all these websites that were, medically focused, I guess, statistically focused. And none of that was really something that I felt was helping necessarily. The facts were the facts. I wasn't going to change them just by knowing them, I guess. What I needed more was what to expect and how to prepare and to support Tom. So I guess that was probably more the question that I needed to be asking the social workers or the nurses or other parents, that getting the perspective of other parents who've been through it, because, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Surely there's other people who've been through this that can help me. And when I went to, and, I didn't have a lot of time to focus on finding these resources, but I was coming up empty. So I just, went along, did my very best as I went. But then once we lost Tom and his service was done, and I sort of just crawled into bed for weeks and weeks, and I was sort of constantly sort of thinking about all the stuff, and I had all this, I had guilt, I had rage, I had, constant misery, and I was soaking in it. But then something else started to come through, was this anxiousness that I would forget any little tiny thing about Tom. And I think when you think of an adult who passes away, or an older person, there's all these people that hold so many memories of that person. So, footy mates or work colleagues, or, girls from uni that you hung out, whoever, like you have this huge branch that you have spread your impact to so many people. And so everyone holds all these memories. But when you're talking about a 7-year-old little boy, I'm his mum, and I hold so many of his memories, more than, than others. And so I didn't want, as I get older, and, my marbles start to roll around a little less vigorously, I didn't want any of that to go, because I needed Tom's life, Tom's story, Tom's fights, everything about Tom to be captured. And every day that went past and the time that went away, I was getting more and more built up about, oh no, what will happen? And then a friend of mine said to me, Trish, just write it down. Like, what? Stop worrying, just write it down. And so I was in Melbourne with a good friend of mine, Sharon, visiting my cousin. And she was just sort of, I think, trying to break the routine and get me out of my bed. And we went down to Melbourne for a weekend. And my cousin, Patrice, she said to me, Trish, I love your Christmas letter that you write every year. You're a really good writer. You should just write a book. Actually, write a book. Write it down and then write a book. And so I said, oh, okay. And so I thought about it for a bit. And then the more that took hold of, like, no, this could be a really good thing. This could be helpful to me, and it could help my healing as I go through. It will stop this anxious feeling that I have about losing Tom's memories. And then perhaps maybe it could be a help to other families thrust into this, nightmare that is pediatric cancer, that is brain injury, that is grief. And so, yeah, I sat down. It was maybe 3 months later to start the process, and then I finished and published by late November of that year. So, and I'm a mad procrastinator. Like, I will make any effort to not do something that is difficult.
Wow. Okay.
So I made a very clear goal, and you make a promise to your son that you will have it ready and done before his first anniversary, and I got it done. So that was the motivator for me, and that's why I have the book now, and I'm really, really happy that I did it for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that the memory of Tom, obviously will be there now with you forever. And I think that's such great advice for others who are also in that same experience of losing a loved one. I think it's a fear for a lot of people, and I've heard that many times from people that, they're afraid to forget. They're not going to remember everything. And of course, you want to honor and keep those and cherish those memories, and have them sort of write them down. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. But you've done so much more than that. You are now helping so many other people to navigate this nightmare, right, that they're going through, so that it is not as horrible, for them, and to know that they're not the only ones who have gone through this, and that there is a purpose for all of this, and that I look at it this way, that your son has provided such a gift at such a young age, at 7 years old, such a beautiful gift that he shared with the world, teaching people strength and compassion, and those are lessons that, special people are given. And I think that it's a beautiful way to honor his memories, encapsulating that through the written word, and
Yeah.
bringing that story to life for other people. You can never really try to figure out the reasons why things happen, right? But it's like, it's amazing to know that there is a gift, and in all of our biggest challenges in life, there is a gift, and it may take a long time to find what that gift is, because it's so painful at the time, but through that pain there is this beautiful illumination that comes at the end of it, that we can help other people as well. And that's a gift that you have as well, to be Tom's mom and to be the facilitator of that beautiful gift in the journey, right? In the journey that you're going to continue, along with Cameron and the rest of your family. So, again, I truly acknowledge the strength and the courage that you have for pushing through that nightmare, through the roller coaster of emotions, the depths of profound grief, and really finding a way to find the benefits and the beauty through that. Now we do have to take a break, so we're going to continue the conversation when we come back. You're listening to the Mindset Mentor here on Sauga 960 AM. We will be back with Trish Carpenter. Stay tuned. And welcome back to the Mindset Mentor here on Sauga 960. I hope you're having an absolutely phenomenal day. Today, we are getting real and raw, and we are talking about grief and loss. And in particular, my guest, Trish Carpenter, she is an author of Big Hand, Little Hand, in which is a story of a mom's, story of love and loss. And it's her story of losing her 7-year-old son to cancer, to brain cancer, and it's her journey, and it's really helping other people learn how to get through that, the whole stage, the process of getting the diagnosis, and some of the terminology that she had to learn, what that meant, and she's now helping other people again navigate through that process. So I want to continue the conversation. Welcome, Trish. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Just
Thank you.
before we came back, you and I were talking about, well, I'm in shock and awe of, how amazing you have been through this process, and how quickly you were able to write a book. I know that you were inspired to write it with a deadline, in honor of your son, Tom. Keeping that in mind. So it really gave you that momentum. But I am truly amazed that you were able to achieve so much in such a short period of time, losing your son at the beginning of 2019, and now being here and being able to talk about it so beautifully and eloquently, And I was saying, without being, in tears the entire time. And of course, you have a range of emotion. So the tears, they still happen, they still flow, and that's a normal process. So I want to talk about that experience for you, because I think it's important for people to understand that, it's absolutely okay, and it's good to be able to show emotion and not to hide it, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I found that when it all had first happened and Thomas had passed away in January, uh, the only people I was dealing with were people who knew the story already. So I wasn't having to explain myself. And if I found myself at the grocery store and I just started crying, I really didn't care what other people thought. I was in my own sort of pocket of the world, and I just didn't worry too much. But I find that as time has gone on, when I've spoken to people, new people, and I've been telling them my story, initially, yes, I would just be in tears pretty quickly. That would lead to this look of fear across the person's face as they've gone, what have I done? Oh no. But then over time, like, I've learnt that I really do, I'll take any opportunity to talk about Tom, to keep him in my life, to keep him in the lives of others, to keep him in our consciousness. And so that sort of ability to express all that we went through, and how I'm going and all of that, I've just developed, I guess, a skill set to be able to do that in a way that I think is helpful to other people as well. Because as you said at the beginning, grief is difficult for a lot of people to manage or to witness. And we're all going to end up going through it. Like, if you love someone, then you're going to end up grieving at some point. We're all going to have to deal with it at some point.
And there's so
And
many
I think
different layers, right? I mean, that could be
exactly,
even the loss of a job, right? A relationship. There's so many different things.
yeah, that's right. And so, and grief is not a mental illness. It's not. It's something. It's a human experience that we just have to find ways to make sure that when there's someone who is grieving, to A, not make it worse, but B, also just be present to it and be okay with it. And often a lot of bereaved parents that I've talked to have said it's amazing how many times we end up having to try and comfort the other people that are struggling to manage the confronting scenario that they all have. They might not realize they're in the presence of a bereaved parent until that comes up. And then there's sort of like, because no one's been sort of educated in how to deal with that. And sometimes all you need to do is just express this very human understanding and empathy, and rather than give a cliche and shut down a conversation or whatever else people will naturally react in whatever way. Just if we became a little bit more across how it is for grieving people, and less closed down about it and a bit more open about it, then maybe it would be easier for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, people have the best intention and they try to be helpful when they just don't know what to say. And that's why I think this is so great to learn, what is helpful and maybe what's not helpful. Yeah, I remember reading an article of a woman who was a grief therapist. She counseled people, and she says, I thought I understood grief. This is what I do for a living. But she says, until you experience it, you don't really understand it. So she really got it when she went through her own grief.
Yeah.
And so you can absolutely have a different level of understanding, right? And maybe a little bit more knowledge at that point of, what to say. But I think that to be present for people is always a good thing, right? I know that it's an uncomfortable conversation sometimes, but it's important to just be there. And if you don't know what to say, then don't say anything, but just show up, right? I think show
Yeah.
up and just let somebody know that you're there, and that's it. I think sometimes we put too many words and try to be as helpful as possible, and maybe try to bring up, well, I know a person who went through something similar. But I don't think that
Yeah.
you're going to want to hear that at that point, because what matters is your journey and what you've just, your heart's been ripped out of you.
When someone does say something that really sort of stings, and I know that they're only trying to fill an awkward silence or to try and make me feel better.
Yeah.
but in talking to other bereaved parents as well, I was at a seminar the other day. It was a grief tending workshop, and one of the presenters said she had been speaking to a bereaved mother, and someone had said something at the the food market, and she threw a cooked chicken at that person because she was so cross with the insensitivity in a bag, like there wasn't mess, but and I try to remember, look, they're just doing their best, and I've just come up with some strategies to, if I want to talk about it, then I will just talk about it, and I'll be okay if I'll wait for them to get their levels of discomfort in place, or if I don't have the emotional energy to go down that path, I find ways to change the subject or shut it down or move away. And so I do what's right for me in that particular moment. And that's the problem. There's no like one catch-all, thing that you can do. It depends on the person you're talking to, your relationship with them, how comfortable you feel, how fragile you are that particular day. And I remember one friend in particular, and she was sort of like the partner of my partner's friend, sort of, I guess. So we didn't know each other really well. And but she came, they were visiting one day, and she said to me, "How are you today?" As compared to "How are you?" Which, I remember a lot of people at Tom's service, and they hadn't seen me in, maybe a year, because I'd been sort of pretty focused on what we were doing. Yeah. And the first thing, of course, they ask is, "Oh, how are you?" And then they go, "Oh, what a ridiculous question to ask." They're horrified that, and they feel like they've said the wrong thing. But it's just this, this instinct. It's just the first thing you say when you see someone you haven't seen in a while. And so when she said to me, "How are you today?" that sort of that gave me the opportunity just to focus on how I was going that day. And if I wanted to, I could say, "Well, absolutely rubbish." But I didn't have to try, or I could say, "Yeah, it's a good day today. It's not. It's it's better." But I didn't have to really think, "Oh, am I encapsulating my entire experience since I last saw you with this question and with what answer I can come up with?" So I kind of liked that, the simplicity of that little change, because I guess if you recognise that for someone who's grieving, that every day can be, different. You can have a really bad day, particularly if it's leading up to an anniversary day or an important day for in the calendar of your relationship with Tom, or if it's been a good day because you didn't wake up crying that day and you got out of bed and you had a moment of joy, so I think that was a really nice little thing. So sometimes when people don't know what to say, I say, "Well, that was good for me. I liked that time."
It makes a perfect sense, and it's interesting, right? It's just you add the one word, today in there, that makes a big difference. Because I think also too, when somebody asks you, "Well, how are you?" It's like, well, obviously you don't want to diminish everything that's happened. Yeah, exactly, right. And so it's a hard question to answer, right? But the today is, in this moment, how are you feeling, right? That's excellent, advice. So I also, would love to talk about some of the, really the mindset shift for you and how you were able to get through, the lying in the bed and crying and obviously going through some really dark, deep emotions of despair and experiencing that grief. What was it that made you sort of realize that, you wanted to move past that?
Yeah, so, initially I was very focused on the fact that my whole life had changed overnight. For 13 months, I had been Tom's carer. I was, getting his meds. I was moving him around his wheelchair. We were going to the hospital. My whole life was based around all of the stuff to do with Tom's brain injury and his cancer. And the sideline of that was I also was looking after Cameron. I was also in a relationship with my now husband, Owen. I wasn't working, so I didn't have that sort of as part of my life at that time. So I had gone from being a full-time, high school teacher, raising two boys by myself to now I was missing Tom, and all of that activity and my routine from the last 13 months was gone. So I had no purpose. I wasn't ready to return to work. And so I found myself sort of sitting still going, well, I don't want to do anything. I never want to do anything. I don't want to get further away. I don't want time to march on. I wanted to stay as close to the last time I was with, my little boy. And so I was really stuck for a while. But I also, I knew this was coming. So I think in comparison to a parent who loses their child suddenly through an accident or whatever that might be, but you don't have the lead up of a protracted illness, I'd had a certain amount of anticipatory grief with those few months prior. And so I was prepared to just sit and wallow in it for a bit, and I was just going to be okay with that. And the people around me, thankfully, were supportive of whatever I needed at that time. I did. And I, years before, when I was going through my divorce, I had sort of started to see a psychologist because I wanted to make sure that, by the end of that process that my boys were looked after and that the relationship was productive in a co-parenting way and I wasn't turning into a bitter old lady, so I'd had that relationship set up with that particular therapist. And while I hadn't seen her for a long time, after Tom passed, I was able to reach out to someone I already trusted who knew me. And so that was a strategy, a way of thinking, okay, well, I'll find a way back and I guess if it had just been me, I might have just continued to soak in sort of that level of misery. But I had Cameron, knocking on my door every day, and I had my husband Owen, fretting as well and worrying about me, and my family, really gathered around. I've got 3 sisters and my mum, and so I had to get up, and I did get up. And I found different things, and as I thought, okay, when am I going to get to a point where I need to find this new purpose? And so, and because I work in education, I'm dropping Cameron to school, and I'm looking at all the kids that are Tom's age, and that triggers me off straight away. And then I'm going back to school, and teenagers, they're not thinking outside themselves, are they? They're fairly egotistically motivated, and so they don't know or care if they're rude to me, and I might go, oh, you little, because of course their perspective and my perspective is very different. And so, I'm looking at them going, what do you mean you're cross because I won't let you, imagine if you were in hospital, imagine if and so that's, I'm trying to work through that without, getting fired or saying the wrong thing. So I'm internalizing a lot of that, but then I could come home and just sort of, and I tried to just take time and just ease my way back, I guess. And then because I had decided to write the book, writing became a great outlet for me. And so while I would sit there and I'd think, okay, well, I'm going to write about this today, or I remember that anecdote, and I cried through every word that came out, and I knew that every time I'd sit down for that 2-hour block or whatever, that it would be hard, that it would be really difficult, and I'd be exhausted after it. But I guess and I've always found that if I have a good cry, I will feel lighter at the end of it, and I have no clue why. But if I have a big cry, I will sleep better that night, and I will get up and I'll feel a bit more refreshed, because obviously that's something about me that I need to. That's how I can release it. And so I just really gradually eased my way back in. But then a colleague of mine, she had lost her longtime husband just 3 or 4 days after Thomas passed, and he had also passed away from brain cancer. And she found that she needed to go back, after a few months, to full time. She needed to, to have that structure and that purpose sort of pushed into place, or else she felt that she, and so I guess everyone grieves so differently. Some people need to go back into their life the way it was, prior. Other people need far more time. And I guess also that's a really tricky thing, the idea of timeline for grief, because people will put this random, arbitrary timeline on how quickly they think you need to get over it, and which is a horrifying phrase. P.S. Never use get over it, because it's never going to be, it's not a thing. You can't, there's no getting over it. Like for the rest of my days, I will be remembering my Thomas. It will just perhaps feel differently as I go through it. And so, that idea of well, she'll get over it soon. She'll move on, eventually. I have no intention of doing that, but I will be able to find ways to find joy. And initially finding joy, I felt great guilt. As soon as I'd feel that moment of joy, like walking the dog with Cam and Owen and looking at a sunset, and I'd have this moment of joy, and then I'd go, oh, you are a terrible mother, and I'd get really guilty. Like, how can I feel happy if Tom's not here? That's not okay. It's this betrayal. And so you've got all of that piled on to the rest of it. And, and slowly my mindset has had to change. And so I've had to think to myself, would Tom want me to spend the rest of my days bemoaning the fact that he's not there, or is there a way that I can sort of share it with him? And so when I do have these moments of joy and I see a beautiful sunset, I say, oh, Tom, thank you for my sunset today. Or I will have little chats with him when I'm on my own. I'm sure people, looking at me in the car think, oh, there's this crazy lady talking to herself. Thankfully, there's the Bluetooth. Maybe people think I'm having a conversation
exactly.
on the phone. But, sometimes I will have a chat with Tom because I just need to talk to him and it makes me feel better. And I will do whatever makes me feel better. And that's a way that I can keep, Tom part of my life and part of other people's lives, because I will talk about Tom. I'll talk about Tom with Cam, and Cam is fine with it. He is happy to talk back. So it's not a taboo scenario in our house. Mm-hmm. And when people get to know me, they know it's not a taboo scenario to talk about Tom as well. So
I love it, and it's so beautiful, and it's really important to know exactly what's going to work for you. As you said, everybody processes grief differently, and that could be the crying or the talking to your loved one or throwing a chicken when you need to throw a chicken. You sometimes you just got to vent, get those emotions out, because when we bottle things up, that's going to lead to a lot of stress and tension, and can lead to disease, right, in the body. And so it is important to really process it in the way that you need, and to not be judgmental, with somebody who is grieving. And as you say, many people just think, oh, well, you should get over it. Oh, they give you a couple of days off work and you're back to work. When you lose a loved one, you have your, 5 days of grieving or whatever it is, and they expect you to be fine and that life goes on. Well, life does go on, but the grieving process also goes on. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we are going to take a break, and we will continue this profound conversation with Trish Carpenter, who is just being real and raw and vulnerable and sharing her experience and her story of losing her young son, Tom, at the age of 7 to brain cancer, obviously a parent's worst nightmare, and, so bravely sharing her story. She also wrote about it in her book called Big Hand, Little Hand, and it's a mom's story of love and loss. Stay with us. We'll be back after this break. Welcome back to the Mindset Mentor on Sauga 960. We are continuing the conversation with the phenomenal Trish Carpenter, who is sharing her story of love and loss. She lost her 7-year-old son, Tom, to brain cancer. Tom was a twin. He had a twin brother. He has a twin brother, Cameron. And I'd love to talk, Trish, about Tom's personality. I'd love to get an insight. I know that you love to talk about Tom, and that's healing for you, and it's just a way for you also to honor his memory and to have his presence around. So I'd love to talk about what his personality was like before the cancer.
Yeah, well, my beautiful boy Tom, he was very energetic. He loved to run. He loved to climb. One day I found him as a 2-year-old. He climbed up onto the water heater. I have no clue how exactly he managed it, but there he was sitting up there. He loved the beach. We live in Queensland, so we're not far from the Sunshine Coast, and we would go to the beach, and he was fearless, absolutely fearless in the waves. And he loved to wrestle around with his brother Cameron, his twin brother Cameron. And just he was a really social, character, really cheeky, really funny. He loved to dance as well. So often, and, he'd push through his dinner nice and quick. And so Cameron would still be laboriously eating. And after he'd finished, I'd say, okay, well, we'll have a dance in the kitchen. And so Tom and I would twirl and dance and carry on in the kitchen, which would encourage Cameron to eat faster. And so he loved music, and that was, I have all these beautiful videos of him, having a dance, having a sing. And when Tom got sick and was fighting his brain injury and trying to rehabilitate all of those neural pathways to every little muscle, we used music to help him. We used music to calm him down when he was agitated. We used music to motivate us. I used music a lot to sort of get my own sort of emotional settings right. And so that was something that we shared a fair bit, because I'm a music teacher, and so music's a big part of our lives. And so that was a really lovely part. And I think also once, and I think this is true for a lot of parents who have kids who suffer with really serious illness, that you see this incredible resilience come out of these kids and adaptability, and they can adjust far, far better than I think adults do when they are confronted by something like this. That's what I've been told as well. But Thomas's strength and his compassion and insight was so amazing to witness in the hospital, because he was frustrated when he couldn't do the things he used to do, and he couldn't communicate them like he used to. But he worked so hard. He had this amazing persistence that I think so many people would have just gone, oh, I'm done. It's too hard. So I was really. I was fortunate to be able to witness how incredible this little boy, who had suffered such a catastrophic, life change. And then there would be these beautiful moments. So there was this glorious, it was like the second or third chemo round, and Tom's little body really didn't cope well with chemo compared to other cancer kids, or so our oncologist told us. And so he was vomiting, he was nauseous and vomiting for months and months and months. And there was one night in the hospital where he had been, we were on our fourth vomit, I think, and that one took us by surprise, so a big mess. And I'd scooped him up into some towels and blankets, and we were sitting off to the side while the nurses changed his bed. And I looked down at him, it was like 2 a.m, and he looked up at me and he had this lovely smile, and I said, Thomas, what do you have to smile about? This has been a rubbish night. And he said, and, he spoke really slowly because he was still, trying to develop his speech. And he said, I know you love it when I smile, Mum. And I was like, oh, my gosh. And there was one other day he said, you're getting rewards, Mum. You get 4 rewards. And I said, what am I getting a reward for? And he said, for caring for me. And I was like, oh, my gosh. So, I really feel sometimes that he looked after me just as much, because he could see that I was struggling, and I would do my very best to be strong. But he was, just such a beautiful soul, so kind. And I think that's part of the reason, I really love, in Brain Cancer Awareness Month, which was just this May, Cameron and I, we make packs for the homeless, because we do it in Tom's name, because he was this kind soul. And, I advocate for blood donation, or I advocate for research funding. But I do all of that because Tom taught me, to be strong. He taught me this, wonderful compassion. And I knew it, but having those really explicit memories and examples from Tom has really, been such a gift to me. So,
yeah, and it sounds like anyone who had the opportunity to know Tom, knows that he was such a beautiful gift. And I also, would love to ask you. Obviously, Tom was a twin. His brother Cameron. How did Cameron cope with that? Obviously, losing a loved one, a sibling, is devastating. But to be a twin, I can imagine. I mean, I can't imagine the impact that would have on him.
Well, I think Cam took it quite personally to begin with. Cameron, and again, children grieve differently to adults, but they definitely grieve. And I'd be checking in with Cam a lot, because he wasn't sort of, volunteering the information. But every now and then he'd ask a question. And thankfully, these sorts of questions only really came out sort of in the immediate, months following. But there was questions about, was it my fault? Maybe it was my fault. Maybe when we were in your belly, Mum, maybe I did something then. But Thomas was the one who used to kick Cameron a fair bit. So I said, no, mate, none of this is your fault. And then there was some other things like, maybe it would have been better if it had happened to me instead of Tom. Or maybe you wouldn't be a sad mum if it was me. And so, there was a lot of conversations that I wanted to have with Cameron to assure him that his place in the family, none of that none of that would have made me feel any better. I would, and I think over time he sort of started to understand that, and then he started to take on this role of, well, I'm going to help mum, and so he will spend a fair amount of his time, trying to ensure that I'm okay, the same way his brother did. And so, when he writes me a Mother's Day card, he signs Tom's name for me, and I adore that. I adore that he writes from Cameron and Thomas. Yeah, and when I'm having a cry, he goes, "Mum, are you sad about Tom?" And I said, "I am sad about Tom." And he goes, "That's okay." And he'll give me a little massage. He'll say, "Is there anything I can do, Mum?" And 10-year-old boys, they don't often offer to do whatever you want. They've fairly decided that I would like some screen time, or I would like this, activity. And so I've watched him really grow. His emotional maturity, I think, is, well ahead of where it might have been. And I'm so proud of how he handles himself amongst it all. And I asked him the other day, I said, "Mate, how do you think you're going? We're a couple of years away now from the last time we were with Tom. How do you think you're going?" He goes, "Oh, I'm pretty good. I think we're pretty good. Tom's still with us." And I said, "Yeah, okay, great." So I think the fact that we haven't told him he can never, we just won't talk about Tom, or I think that's been important. So this continuing bond, and that Tom is still part of our life, in however way we can make it, is a good thing. And we have Italian every 9th of the month, because that's Tom's anniversary day. And so we have Italian because Tom loves Italian. And so Cameron goes, "Is Tom's dinner tonight?" I said, "It is. Spaghetti's on the menu," so it's really special that we have that.
Absolutely. Of course, Cameron sounds like a treasure as well. You're blessed, to have both of these, beautiful souls in your life, and who will always continue to be with you, right? Whether physically or, from afar and above, perhaps, or wherever. But, I do thank you so much for, sharing your story, and also sharing Cameron's journey. I think it's important to have those conversations, and I'm really glad that he asked the questions, and that, you were able to talk him through that, because the guilt and the blame, very common, of course. And, kids have the tendency to always blame themselves. And if I did this, then this wouldn't have happened. So these are really important conversations. And I thank you again for having this conversation here with us. So I know that you have also written some wonderful articles and blogs to help people through their grieving process, and just, other things. Where can they find your information and your book?
Yeah, so I decided I would set up a website. A friend of mine said to me after I'd finished writing the book, "Well, why don't you just keep writing? Like, maybe there's more that you can share. Maybe other people have the same experience." And so I started writing a blog last year, particularly with COVID, providing a bit more time. And so I've got this website, www.trishcarpenter.com, and on there you can, find the blog. It's called Mornings with Tom. And I've got, you can look up the book there and see if that interests you as well. You could purchase the book from that website too. So that's where people can find out more about me and Tom, if they so choose. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, truly, I want to say, Trish, that you are a remarkable woman. And thank you for having the courage and the strength for joining us to share your story and take us on, a journey through your world and Tom's and Cameron's, and to really help other people, navigate the grief process, which, and again, it is a process, and there's some steps. It's going to take some time. But, it's so helpful to know that, you're not alone in the world of grief. Everyone experiences grief, to some degree, but obviously, losing a child is, emotionally exhausting and draining, and a profound grief. And to have this strength to be here today, I do acknowledge you for, the work that you're doing and continue to do. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Tania. It was lovely to talk to you today.
An absolute pleasure having you here. So everyone, that's a wrap for today's show. And remember that your mindset is like a muscle. So make sure that you strengthen and condition it. And join me next Tuesday at 1 p.m. for your next mindset workout.